Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to highlight two upcoming events. First, I want to invite everyone to our summer solstice fundraiser on Thursday, June 4th in Jersey City, New Jersey, to support Let's Share the Sun. Let's Share the Sun is doing important work expanding access to solar energy and storage and helping communities benefit from clean, reliable, and affordable power. They've been mostly focused in Puerto Rico. I've actually gone on 3 delegations in the past year to Puerto Rico to assist Let's Share the Sun with solar and storage for families that are in need. We're excited to bring together the solar community, clean energy leaders, friends, and the Jersey City, New York City community for a great cause. You could join us by registering at the Luma link in the show notes. I also want to thank our sponsors for supporting this fundraiser. Our sponsors are Soul Harvest, Kinetic Communities, Jordan Energy, Positive Deviancy, Renew Energy, and the Solar Maverick Podcast. We appreciate your support in helping make this fundraiser possible. If you're interested in sponsoring this fundraiser, please email us at info@renewenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. Secondly, I'm excited to share that I'm speaking at the ACOR, the American Council of Renewable Energy Finance Forum in New York City, taking place May 13th and May 14th, 2026. I'll be participating in a panel titled Scaling Behind the Meter Solar and Storage for C&I and Digital Infrastructure. This is one of the most important conversations happening in energy right now. Behind the meter solar and storage are becoming increasingly important for commercial and industrial customers, especially energy intensive users like data centers. This panel will focus on evolving financial structures, aggregation strategies, and structured platforms that can help distributed energy assets. We'll have a link as well to this conference in the show notes. I'm looking forward to joining this conversation at the ACOR Finance Forum. Let's get into it. Hi, this is Benoy Thanjan, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast, and also the founder and CEO of Renew Energy. Renew Energy, we're a solar developer and consulting firm. We've developed more than 100 megawatts of solar projects across the US, and we help clients execute clean energy projects with confidence. We act as your owner's rep, overseeing developers, EPCs, and financing partners to de-risk your project and keep it on schedule. We also provide development as a service, supporting origination strategy and execution so you can advance projects without building a large internal team. On the renewable energy credit side, we offer REC brokerage, REC asset management, and custom renewable energy credit research, helping clients understand pricing, policy shifts, and long-term market dynamics. In addition, we provide new market analysis and financial modeling to evaluate opportunities, assess project viability, and support investment decisions. To learn more, reach out at info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. We'll also have information on the notes of the podcast as well. Let's get into it.
It was really interesting. I had this LinkedIn post back in October, and I was like, hey, y'all in the industry, this thing is happening and you're not paying attention. One of the regulators pushed back and was, you're causing mass chaos. Why are you posting this? And I'm like, well, because it's really important and people should be worried. And if people aren't worked up about it, that's a problem.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have Kellie MacPherson on the show. She's the Executive Vice President of Compliance and Risk at Radian Generation, and she's also a board member of the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA. Kellie is one of the leading experts in NERC compliance and cybersecurity for solar storage and wind assets, with experience overseeing compliance programs across gigawatts of projects and guiding companies through audits with 0 violations. And this is a critical conversation because a major shift from NERC, which is the Northern American Electric Reliability Corporation, is about to bring a large portion of renewable energy assets into scope for the first time. Kellie, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you making time and talking
Yeah.
about this
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
anytime. And you as well have a podcast as well. Can you talk about your podcast? Or
Yeah, I have a podcast called Navigating the Grid, and we talk a lot about what's happening, especially related to compliance and cybersecurity. A couple of years ago, I got some feedback that I was really good at like explaining weird, complicated compliance things, like so that people could understand. And people are like, could you like say this stuff in a podcast so we could like share it and other people can learn? And so that's kind of the genesis of the podcast.
that's an amazing story. And I mean, that's a gift to have, especially
Yeah.
compliance.
Yeah, it can be really boring, so we try really hard to make compliance interesting.
Oh, for sure. And you do, the passion for it definitely resonates in
Yeah.
the best way. Well, before we get started talking
Yeah.
about obviously the cybersecurity deadline on May 15th,
Yeah.
like you have an amazing, background. Can you talk about like your background and how you got to where you are today at Radian Generation?
Oh gosh. Well, thanks. Yeah. So I started out as an operator at the California ISO, the independent system operator, as an intern when I was 18. I actually grew up in the industry. My dad was an operator at the control room in Southern California Edison. I used to go before cybersecurity and physical security. I used to go with my dad to the control room as a kid and hang out. So I guess it's like, in my blood or something. Um, but yeah, I started out as an operator and then, worked my way up and through the different companies that I worked for. My dad actually helped to write quite a bit of the what is now like the NERC standards and registration criteria when I was in college. And then he actually started his own NERC consulting firm. And I was working for a nonprofit at the time. And my dad was like, Kellie, when are you going to grow up and get a real job? Why don't you come and work for me? So I went and worked for my dad and dug into compliance and yeah. And so I worked for him for several years doing traditional like generation NERC compliance,
Yeah.
nuclear, hydro, cogens, things like that. And then in 2012, I made the transition over to the renewable industry and I worked at Recurrent Energy, bringing on their first gigawatt of projects that were NERC compliant projects. And then from there, I went to Cypress Creek Renewables, where I set up their control center and their SIP medium environment. And I joined Radian in October of 2019. So it's been a really fun journey working like the developer side, the O&M side, and now, a services company helping developers and owners and operators to be compliant with the NERC standards. So it's been a really fun journey getting to know the renewable industry. And it feels like I've been here forever, but I'm definitely not the oldest in the industry, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. That's an amazing story. And I didn't even know that you sang about with your dad. And the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're in the family business. I have experience as well working in the family business before I started, my own
Yeah.
company later. So that's like really interesting. You're a maverick yourself. And
Yeah.
maybe it's like worth explaining to people like what NERC is, why is it
Yeah.
important? I know a lot about it, but it's interesting to me because you're the only person really talking about this May 15th deadline.
Oh, yeah.
That's so
I know it
important.
is really interesting. It is kind of quiet about it right now. And so we've been trying really hard this year, even like fall of last year, to like get the word out basically. It was really interesting. I had this LinkedIn post back in October and I was like, hey y'all in the industry, like this thing is happening. And if like you're not paying attention, some people are already getting like notifications from NERC and stuff. And I actually, one of the regulators like pushed back and was like, you're causing mass chaos. Like, why are you posting this? And I'm like, well, because it's really important and people should be worried. And like, if people aren't like worked up about it, like that's a problem. It was really interesting. So, but yeah, so NERC really started. Okay, I tell this joke all the time. Like I make this joke all the time, and I think I kind of have my dad's consent for the joke, but maybe not totally. But we always joke that NERC started from a group of Dougs. So Doug is a dumb old utility guy. Like it's just like a joke, right? But it's this group of utility guys that used to get together starting in 1963, and they would just talk about things that were happening like on the electric grid, like how to fix things and how to do things better, right? But in 2003, there was this like massive blackout on the eastern seaboard. So, think about New York City, the middle of August, heat wave, 115 degrees, like just like brutal, right? Like not weather that they're used to. 3-day blackout on the grid. Unfortunately, that means fatalities, right? Like think about hospitals, think about, exposure to heat for folks that aren't used to that, things like that, right? And so out of that, Congress passed the Federal Power Act, Section 215, adding Section 215 in the Federal Power Act. And so what that did is it said, hey, we need to make these standards mandatory. Well, okay, so what's really interesting then was FERC said, okay, great. Hey, industry, like who wants to be in charge of this? Like who wants to write the standards? Who wants to do registration, right? NERC was like the only one that kind of raised their hand, like that group of utility guys, right? And they're like, well, I guess we could figure this out. So it's really interesting because then NERC became a corporation and like had to actually grow up. So if you think about it, a lot of these standards and regulations, started in 2007. Like I used to joke that we were like an unruly toddler as an industry, but now I feel like we're like the 16-year-old kid who like just got its driver's license, right? Like you're pretty independent, like you got most things figured out, but you're still like a 16-year-old kid, right? That's kind of how our industry is now at this point. And so, what they're really focused on is reliability at the end of the day, right? Like, how do we make the electric grid reliable? And so that's why we're talking about the May 15th date, because what happened is over the past 5 years, we've realized that these inverter-based resources actually can mess up the grid, like if the settings aren't right? Like they don't play well with others, play well with the grid. Think about it. You have a developer that like comes from a financial background, right? And is building these solar facilities, but like they don't understand grid operations and why like following the protection system study and making sure the relays like operate correctly. Like they don't understand like how you affect like the rest of grid reliability, right? And so what they did is what NERC realized was that they're having a lot of different events happen on the grid that some of these projects were really affecting. And what they realized was the original registration criteria for inverter-based resources, so solar, wind, and battery storage, was 75 megawatts connected 100 kV. Well, what they realized was they were having all these outages and reliability events, but they were actually below that threshold, right? So they were at 20 megawatts connected 60 kV or higher. They realized there was a whole gap of projects between 20 megawatts and 75 megawatts that were actually not being taken, didn't fall into NERC registration, and were actually affecting reliability. And so that's why they made this change. And so starting May 15th of this year, 2026, all those sites that are 20 megawatts connected 60 kV and above, they all now have to register and be compliant with the NERC standards. So at the end of the day, it's really cool because it really helps our industry. Like it solidifies our industry as being this power, a power source that can actually, we have an electron crisis on the grid right now. There's not enough electrons, right? Renewables are going to fix that crisis, right? And so by all these projects having to be compliant with NERC, we're now in this awesome place where we're going to be great neighbors, right? And now everyone's going to be held accountable, and it actually elevates the whole industry. So we're really excited about the change. A little nervous because it feels like some people aren't ready, right? And so thank you for having this on the podcast and giving us a chance to talk about that, right? Because there's work to do to get ready for May 15th.
Can you talk about I would assume that projects greater than 20 megawatts, they were notified by NERC about this compliance, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you try to figure out who all fits in that and how many projects are there and stuff. It's been an interesting exercise the last 2 years in the industry, I think, going through like interconnection requests or, IAs and things like that. There's been a big focus on the EIA data. So if your project is registered with EIA, NERC has probably reached out to you. So definitely they've been doing a lot of outreach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how long is like the whole application process? Is it something pretty easy for the
Yeah.
owners to do, or?
It's interesting because the actual registration itself is a piece of paper, right, on a website. Well, technically, it's a form on a website that you fill out. It's pretty basic information about the projects and ownership and things like that. But what's really interesting, the important part is It's really funny. I had this conversation with someone last week. No names to be named today, but they literally are like, well, yeah, I'm all set. And I'm like, what do you mean you're all set? They're like, well, we filled out the form on the website, on the NERC website. I was like, oh, okay. So like you have your compliance program ready, like you have policies and procedures in place. It's like, no, all I had to do is fill out the form. Like they didn't tell me I needed to do anything. And I'm like, okay, so like that's not how this works. You fill out the form. Awesome, cool. Like now you registered yourself. Now you need to be compliant on May 15th. And they're like, well, what does compliant mean? I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so this is where it's like really interesting because it's like one thing to like check the box and fill out the registration. But it's another to actually be compliant with the standards, right? And so there's 8 standards that are applicable right now. And then there's additional standards. It's like a phased approach, right? Where they're going to continue to add standards to the process. So right now, several of the standards require that you have a policy and procedure for how you're compliant with those 8 standards, right? And you actually have to like, it's not just the registration form, but now it's like, hey, is your equipment set up correctly? Will it trip correctly, right? And you have to have a policy and procedure for how you're confirming that your equipment is working correctly, right? And then how you're going to continue to maintain compliance. So those inverter settings, think about a site built in what? Let's think like a 20 megawatt connected 60 kV site right now, built in 2020. Its inverters probably are not meeting the NERC criteria right now because those inverter manufacturers, NERC wasn't even on their radar for a 20 megawatt site, right? Like they just made the settings of those inverters tuned to whatever made performance work, right? Like for so long, like performance, right? Like and output capabilities, et cetera, have like driven like equipment decisions on a site. So many of those sites, like their inverter settings aren't compliant with NERC, and NERC cares how inverters, react to grid events. And so that's where it's really important. And it's not just filling out a paper, but it's actually like putting a program in place and making sure your equipment is all compliant with the NERC requirements.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The whole education process, and then obviously the technology issues with inverters and back
Yeah.
then qualifying, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole
We have,
education process, right? There's some developers who have no
yeah.
experience, right? Dealing
Yeah.
with their
No idea. Yeah. We have it's really interesting. We have a couple wind sites that no names because I don't want to be on anyone's blacklist, but I will say there's a few OEMs out there that, the owners have gone to the OEM and said, hey, we need to update these turbine settings, right? Turbine settings to fix them, blah, blah, blah. And they come back and they're like, well, here's an invoice, for $500,000 to fix it. And the owners are like, wait, what? Like, that's my OpEx for the next 3 years, Like, and so it's a really interesting situation that a lot of owners are finding themselves in, right? So it's like, yeah, one thing to fill out the paperwork, but another to actually figure out like how to be compliant, with those requirements. So it's an interesting season.
For sure. That's interesting. And then how is NERC able to enforce like compliance?
Yeah, so there's several monitoring processes that NERC has. There's technically 8 that are approved by FERC, but most commonly there is self-certification. So annually you can think of it like a mini audit where every year you have to prove that you're compliant with the standard. And then another one is spot checks. So we've seen this a lot. If you remember, it's been a while since I've said this, it's kind of dying down, but if you remember like the Odessa disturbance, and you remember Storm Uri and things like that in Texas. So you had all these sites that tripped offline that were like behaving erratically, right? So NERC actually did a spot check and said, hey, all of you guys that are involved in this, like prove to us that you're compliant and that your equipment's all set correctly. So that's a spot check, right? So a spot check could happen at any time. The NERC could come in and say, hey, show me how you're being compliant with the standards, right? And then there's audits that go on all of the time as well. So there's a few different ways that NERC can come in and make sure that you're compliant. But the letter of the law, the way the rule works, like as soon as you're registered, you need to be fully compliant and audit ready at any point in time, right? So like maybe you get audited every 4 years. It's not like, hey, ignore it for 4 years. It's like, no, when you get audited in 4 years, they're going to ask for 4 years worth of documentation. So it's interesting how they do that.
Yeah, that's definitely really interesting. And like, for example, the example that you used of 2020, a 20 megawatt project, the inverter maximized, right? for the output of the system and not necessarily for
Yeah.
compliance. Does that mean
Yeah.
that they have to replace the inverter to be compliant, or?
It depends, right? Like, can the inverter handle the settings? Like, can it operate like within those new settings? Or is there an OEM that's willing, that knows how to make those changes to the equipment too? So it really is equipment dependent. So we're seeing some sites where it's just really easy, like those T-Mic Ninjas on some of those 20 megawatt sites. I don't want to like oversimplify it, but like it's a much more known, easier process to say, okay, we need to change these settings on these inverters. But then you go in and you have someone with like an older version of an SMA from like 2010, and everyone's sitting around going, how are we going to fix this? Right? Like, so a lot of it is equipment dependent.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then is it easier if like an asset, like an existing asset or a new asset where they're, obviously focused on the NERC compliance?
Mhm.
Like, are you finding that developers are, how can
Yeah.
I say it, like focused on the NERC compliance where they're engineering the systems?
It's interesting. I feel like when I first worked at Recurrent Energy back in 2012 and was starting to talk to developer, and then came in house at a development shop, I was like, gosh, you guys know nothing about NERC. Like, this is really scary. Like, you guys need to know more. I don't feel like it's like that anymore, right? Like, I feel like developers at least like know NERC exists and know they need to do something, but they might not know more than that, right?
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of sophisticated developers out there as well, right? Like, we have developers that, there are projects that are CODing at the end of this year, but they were thinking about NERC compliance 2 years ago, right? Because they knew if you design and construct and build the sites for NERC, with NERC in mind from the beginning, you actually get a much better product and a more compliant facility, and you actually spend less dollars on the back end because you designed for it, right? Like from the
Yeah.
beginning. So
That makes it a lot easier, right? Than
I think so. I think it's a lot harder to come into a site that's been operating for 10 or 15 years and figure out how to get it compliant. But, I mean, we work through it and figure it out, right? But, a lot of those projects that are already operating, oftentimes, like, you need a service provider, like, you need a consultant or someone to come in and help you, because oftentimes it's weird and complicated, right? Like, it's just a different, like, situation that you're working through.
And that's where you normally Radian Generation would come in.
Yeah, we help a lot of folks build out their compliance for each project as they go. We'll do the engineering studies and analysis, for the sites that have the cybersecurity requirements. We'll come in and do a cyber vulnerability assessment, make sure the sites are actually locked down. Oftentimes, those firewalls or those pieces of equipment can be, you have a SCADA provider that, buys things in bulk, and, maybe that equipment is 12 months out of date and needs to be updated before it's actually live protecting a site, right? So yeah, we come alongside and help people figure out how to be compliant and get them ready to go.
Yeah, definitely. That's really great because I feel like there's only very few people who are like experts, and obviously you've grown up. Everything's changing, right? And getting more
Yeah.
complicated.
There are folks, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are folks that do compliance in-house. But even folks that do it in-house end up having some sort of consultant on call or whatever. I think there's a lot to be said for, my team is in an audit almost every week across our portfolio, over 300 project registrations that we manage. So we're constantly learning stuff, right? And we're hearing like, oh, like this is a new question the auditor is going to ask. And we're like, oh gosh, like, okay, we need to change evidence now. Like, this will be way better, right? And like, I think there's like that benefit of working with a consultant, someone that's in the weeds all the time, that's getting that real data and like implementing that back into projects. And so I think folks that are smart, even if you want to do a lot of it in-house, like you still need that like embedded industry. Not, you want to be getting the feedback from the people that are talking to the auditors, right? In some capacity. So it's like, the IRS is going to audit your taxes. Like, you're calling your CPA or whoever prepared your tax report. Like, you're not going to that meeting by yourself, right?
Oh,
Like,
definitely.
the same concept,
Yeah, and I mean it's huge too, right? When your tax person comes, meaning your accountant, like
Yeah.
the IRS looks at you differently if you just brought.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah,
it's
it's really interesting. We had an owner that actually purchased a bunch of projects about 6 months ago, and the projects had a lot of NERC problems. They weren't in a great place. The previous ownership just kind of didn't pay attention to it. And so it was really great because, I mean, it wasn't great for them, but we had a great outcome, right? Because we were able to go to NERC and say, hey, we're helping this owner, get everything fixed, get things brought up to compliance. We have a few issues we need to work through. And, it was really nice because NERC said, like, well, that's really great that you're using Radian. Like, they know what they're doing. Like, we have a great rapport, in relationship with Radian. Like, we'll work with you to work through this, and I think you were able to get them through through all of that without actually being levied any fines, which is really great because technically NERC can audit you $1 million per day per violation,
Oh my God.
in like the most like extreme case, right? Like that's not a normal case to get to the $1 million. I don't want to no scare tactics, but there is a financial impact, right? If you have 5 sites and you have, 3 violations, you could be looking at $100,000 in fines, right? And so I think that's where having someone that like understands how things work and has those relationships and rapport with NERC, that's a great example that we had. We're able to help that client, navigate through some sticky situations without having to pay anything, and so not every situation comes out that great, but a lot of them do.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge, obviously, value add for your customers, and obviously to speak the NERC language and them to know you, right? And then
Yeah.
that representation. And then, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear how many actual like plants actually get audited. Is there like a percentage of the
Yeah. So every facility, every NERC registered entity is required to be audited there's a schedule. So you can be based on your risk, like what type of risk do you pose to the grid from reliability. So you can be audited every year up to 6 years, depending on. So when you register with NERC, then they make an assessment of what type of risk you pose to the grid. So if you think about, like Constellation Energy or Duke Energy or, folks at these great big huge control centers that are managing, 20,000 megawatts worth, those folks are getting audited every single year, a full audit. But a typical generator, that we're talking about here that you and I work with every day, we're looking at like a 4 to 5 year audit cycle.
Oh, okay. That's what you kind of mentioned before in the beginning of the interview.
Yeah.
And then is there anything that we haven't talked about that our audience should know about the May 15th deadline?
Yeah. Gosh. I mean, we talked quite a bit about it, but I think it's a lot of just like, okay, you've got to fill out the paperwork, you got to get registered. But then I think the next piece is like getting the compliance program put together. And at the end of the day, we want renewables to be the solution to the problems we have on the grid, right? Like to provide those electrons to get us through the electronic crisis, to affordable, this is what we talk a lot at the CIA board meetings, renewables is really like the most affordable type of energy that we can provide to the grid. So in my mind, if all these folks are compliant with NERC, it's the ultimate trump card, right? The solar facility can be just as compliant as the coal facility down the street, right? Like, because you're being held and accountable to the same exact standards, like as the coal facility is. And so at the end of the day, like, I think this is really, really important. And I hope our industry like doesn't like ignore it, and we like really take it with the seriousness and the ability it has to like change our industry by doing it well. So
Yeah, we'll be like 21-year-olds.
Yes, exactly. See,
15-year-olds,
we're gonna be like college graduates.
You're college graduates, yeah, definitely. I was
Yes,
laughing too
exactly.
because you said trump card,
Yeah.
because it's kind of connected to the whole, so it's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and like just going I know we talked about this in the pre-interview, but what are the biggest like cybersecurity vulnerabilities you're seeing across renewable energy assets today?
Oh gosh. Well, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of intrusion detection issues that we have, right? Like people trying to get into the sites that are unauthorized, things like that. And I think it's interesting, especially with what's happening with Iran right now and kind of the current political environment. But I think at the end of the day, we're thinking a lot about state-sponsored terrorism. And if you think about, how can you really affect the United States? And, a lot of that comes back to the electrical grid, right? Like if you take out hospitals and, if you're really, military bases, et cetera, like it's a really interesting scenario. Like it's a really interesting attack vector to think through. And so I think that's where cybersecurity has become so important. It has always been important, but I think it has become even more important, with the current political environment that we're seeing, and we've seen that see a board level are spending a lot of time with the Department of Commerce. They're doing an investigation into some issues with inverters, right? And looking at, how is China, Russia, Iran, those folks, impacting the grid. So I think we're just going to continue to see more stringent regulations too on the cybersecurity front, just because the threat has gotten so much greater.
It has. It's interesting, yeah, that there are
Yeah.
foreign actors trying to take the US grid down.
Mhm.
Can you talk about, like, if our audience is not aware, like, what are ways that you kind of mentioned this a little bit, using why is cybersecurity so important? What are the different ways that basically people could attack, like, our energy system? I think
Yeah.
when we talked about the pre-call, I think
Yeah.
Iran was trying to hack the gas pipeline.
hmm Yeah, it's funny. Back in 2009, there's a lot you can Google about this. There was a NERC alert about it, but there was a Susnex virus. And what actually happened, this virus came in, they were able to infect a generator turbine and change the settings on it. And they actually blew up the facility because they changed the governor settings, right? And so it was no longer operating at the correct hertz, right? And so it's interesting because when you get into those SCADA controls, like it's not just like disabling a facility, but you could cause a lot of harm to the equipment, right? So a couple weeks ago there was a confirmed attack on pipeline in between Texas and Louisiana, and it was a cybersecurity attack. And these Iranian hacktivist group gained access, and they had to go into local control mode. So if you think about that, thousands of miles of pipeline that needed to be operated locally couldn't be operated from a control center. Now you've got a manpower issue. Like it's really interesting, like the domino effect, right? If you start to think about what can happen.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's something that I don't think Americans obviously had to experience. And then are we
Yeah.
prepared to deal with a situation where there are, like, long-term power
Yeah.
outages?
I don't think we are, right? When you think
Yeah.
about a hospital has a diesel generator and they have enough diesel for 2 days maybe, like,
Yeah.
okay, now if you're in a situation where a whole entire region is blacked out, are you going to be able to it's one thing for one hospital and one diesel generator to then need to go get a backup diesel supply, right? Like get additional fuel. But if you think about that, now a region in a situation where it's lacking fuel, are you going to be able to supply the hospital? Like it gets very critical very quickly, right?
Yeah.
When you start to lose power.
Oh, for sure. That's so interesting because this comes back to why you should look at solar and storage, right?
Yeah,
It's not,
absolutely.
it's obviously the sun, and you're not dependent
Yeah.
on fuel to generate
Yeah.
electricity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And it's the cheapest form of electricity, the fastest to come online.
exactly.
That is so interesting. And then, like, how should the solar community think about, like, cybersecurity and compliance, like, going forward?
I mean, you need to have a plan, right? You need to
Yeah.
be paying attention and you need to be making sure that your equipment isn't out of date. Like, okay, have you ever had that situation where you like haven't updated your iPhone and then you update your iPhone and then it like stops working?
Yeah, definitely all the
Yeah.
time.
It's like the worst. And you're like, dang it, like, why didn't I stay on top of that? And then same thing with these network assets at these sites, right? Like they need constant maintenance to stay up to date to then protect you. Cause okay, so you update your iPhone and then you're like, oh, that thing that was driving me crazy that wasn't working, or my phone timing out, or this thing being broken is now fixed. And you're like, Now my phone works so much better, right? Like same principle to these networking assets at all these sites, right? Like in order to like, they need maintenance. It's not just a set it and forget it. I can't tell you how many sites we have where you come in and the EPC provider's like, here you go, here's the network equipment. And you go in and you're like, okay, and there's 35 users on the SCADA system. We don't need that many people with like full admin control. Oh, and don't worry, the password is admin123. Like those are just like, but like that's reality, right? Like there's just these like basic practices that we can take on the cyber side, right? To like make sure that these sites are protected. So just basic cyber hygiene, to start with, and then this like ongoing like fine tuning. When we saw like the threat with Iran and those things happening, we tightened up a lot across our fleet and made some like really strategic decisions to ensure that our fleet was protected. So
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, this is great like advice, but so important that, people forget about it.
yeah,
Don't think
we do.
about like, hey, how many people are we actually having
Mhm.
access? Hey, how we should have a more complicated password. We should have
Yeah.
symbols, lowercase, uppercase, like
Yeah.
simple things that you talk about on your regular personal security. People tend to forget, especially with like all the passwords that you
Yeah.
have to try to remember, and then you forget which one, and then
Yeah.
Apple tries to give you this really complicated
Yes.
password, and you're like, no, I want to just, and then you use them the same password for major, you
Yeah.
know, websites, which
Yeah.
is not good too, because then it's easily
Yeah.
hackable, and things are getting, especially with AI, easier to hack.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
I mean, are you seeing that too? Like, is
Yeah.
there more vulnerability now
Mhm.
because you have
Yeah.
stuff like AI, like, or Anthropic came up with another version that they technically said they didn't have to, they're not going to release right now because it
Yeah.
exposed all these security flaws within the
Yeah.
banking system.
If you do not have multi-factor authentication deployed across your OT, your operational technology assets at these sites, like you've done yourself a disservice, and if you think about it, you should be thinking about, what are the LDs you're looking at or the lost market revenue you're looking at. If your site gets ransomware or is attacked and taken offline, there's a financial impact that I think a lot of these owners, don't necessarily tie that corollary to, right? They're like, oh, performance and weather and all this, but it's like, but it's also cybersecurity, right? If your site can't connect to the internet, you can't sell power. Some of these sites, middle of Texas, in the middle of summer, we're ramping up for summer here. We're going to get back into these crazy, what, like how many thousands of dollars, per megawatt hour situations. Like, you don't want your site offline, right? So, like, doing some of this basic cyber hygiene is really going to make an impact.
Oh, for sure. That's great to reiterate that. And the other thing too is like distributed energy resources, right? I know there's a blog about this on the Radian Generation. Obviously it helps with reliability in the sense that you're more distributed, but then
Yeah.
it could be easier to hack into these systems because
Yeah.
it doesn't have the same compliance as like a larger
Yeah.
energy asset
Well,
you talk about.
when a lot of those sites, if you think about like 1 to 10 megawatt sites, they might not even have a firewall. Like they don't have a substation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they don't have a firewall. And it's interesting. Like if you think about an owner, they're like, oh, we have 100 sites and they're 5 megawatt sites each. And, they're in a certain region. Like all of a sudden, we're talking about a lot of megawatts that could be pulled off the grid. I think NERC did a great job going down to 20 megawatts, but there should be a higher level of responsibility for owners, with assets 5 megawatts and above, right? And
Yeah.
I think we're going to continue to see that. There was just a ruling last week from NERC and FERC, and they're now going to create a new registration criteria for large loads because that is, the large computational loads are, causing an impact to the grid too. So I think NERC is getting smart about what's going to affect reliability, right? It's all those small distributed sites. Like they need to do something, from a cyber perspective. And then these large loads need to do something too. So I think we're just going to continue to be pushed as an industry to be more reliable. I think this is where owners just can you put your head in the sand anymore. Like this is happening. We need to be good stewards and, good neighbors.
Oh, for sure. That's great insights. And then I guess the other question that I had with this is like, I mean, there's so many questions that I have that I'm trying to not ask them all. But I mean, like you mentioned this a little bit before, like there were
Mhm.
inverters that were manufactured in China where the majority of,
Yeah,
and then they found some sort of backdoor, right? Like potentially, I know that there were certain people are pushing, like obviously manufacturing uh,
yeah,
of important, equipment related to the, I guess, national
yeah,
defense and security of the United States. Like,
yeah.
what's your perspective on all that? And obviously trying to build a supply chain here in the US.
Yeah. Well, I still just really think that like these regulations are good. Like I'm excited to see what happens with FIOC, right? And like where we go with that because I think it's important. Like you need to know where your things come from. You need to know your equipment comes from. You need to know what the vulnerabilities are that you have, right? Like I just think that's common like best practices, you know? And so I think
Yeah.
it's just really important that people are thinking through it and understanding their supply chain and asking good questions. And honestly, the best thing owners can do, the easiest, least cost effective, put some good language in your contracts, right? And say, hey, equipment, inverter supplier or
Yeah, definitely.
network equipment supplier, whoever, like you are following best practices, right?
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
you're going to give us things that make sense, right? Like, and I think there's just like some of that just is like easy, low hanging fruit that we should be doing as an industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people are comfortable with FIAC. It's just that the speed of how,
Yes. How
facilities
fast.
wants you to comply with it. That's the
Hmm.
challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
I know you're very new to the SIA board as of this year, right? In January.
Yeah.
How has that provided you a unique perspective of the industry?
It's been really cool. I knew it was going to be cool, but I don't know that I appreciated like how great it was going to be and what a window into things I was going to have through that. It's been really neat to just to even be in the room and hearing the conversations and where we're going as an industry and be able to like influence change. I sit there and I'm like, okay, I'm the reliability person in the room, right? Like that's my job, that's my perspective. And it's interesting because I wasn't sure, like, oh, is that going to be something that folks are resistant to, or, see it as like a speed bump, and it's really interesting because the whole board cares a lot about reliability. And actually, like, everybody wants to do the right thing, right? It's just a matter of like, how do we implement this into our best business practices, for everyone's like area. So, yeah, it's been incredible. I feel really fortunate that I was voted onto the board by the industry. That was pretty neat. So I'm very grateful to be there.
That's amazing. Congratulations. And we need obviously a unique board who brings unique perspective. And obviously, what you're doing is like really important, especially now that we're trying to graduate college, that
Yes.
we need to have these things, look at these things
Yeah,
that before it was
exactly.
totally.
Yeah, definitely. It's been nice to have a little more focus on the operational side of things with the SEA crew. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And I have one more question. Obviously it's like you worked for your dad. This is how you got into it. Like,
Mhm.
what did you learn working in the family business and with an entrepreneurial family? What is there any like key takeaways? Because our podcast, Solar Maverick
Yeah.
Podcast, is about solar
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. And it's interesting
Like,
because you've worked too on other sides of it, right? A
yeah.
company, developer, you
Yeah.
IPP. So you have a really unique perspective and you've worked at corporate. So you've seen.
Yeah. I am definitely an entrepreneur at heart. I learned a lot from my dad, like on the technical side of things, and a lot, like how to implement programs and things like that. When I joined Radian in October 2019, it was to build out this consulting portion of the business, right? Like they did not offer these services. So I really came in as, the entrepreneur, like the founder of this portion of our business. So we've From me being the sole employee in 2020, we now have over 120 people on my team that is doing this. We have 2 security operation centers in Chennai, India, Guadalajara, Mexico, and Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's been an incredible journey. I definitely love to build things and build businesses, and that was my time at Cypress Creek. Like, they wanted to offer NERC services and the control center, right? Like, they wanted to really get into third party. And so I helped build that program and build that business. So yeah, it's been incredible. And I think at Radian, working with Joe Kastner, one of the original 4 founders of Radian, has been incredible. Like, he's a great mentor and believes in the business and believes in, knew that we would build this thing to over $20 million a year asset. And that's where we're at. And we're just continue to grow every year. But, I'm in the weeds on compliance. So I'm in the weeds on, staffing and hiring and the P&L. And I'm doing all of the areas, thinking about insurance and all the things. So definitely, we spend a lot of time talking about compliance, but definitely business entrepreneur at heart. That's the backbone. I do a lot of marketing, do a lot of speaking, kind of everything that the business needs to, be healthy and grow. And I read a lot of books and listen to a lot of podcasts and all the things.
Yeah, what book recommendation would you have people to read? It's interesting. I'm surprised how many people, when there's a book recommendation, actually read the book and then reach out to me.
Oh, that's awesome. We have a couple different books we've been reading on, and this year we've been really focused on customer centric and things like that. That's that growing. You're in your over 50 employees. You can't reach your hands around everybody and make sure everybody has your feel. So we spent a lot of time, thinking about that. My team read The Nordstrom Way. We've spent some time in the Culture Code this year, and then there's quite a few different books that we read, but I love podcasts too. That's a really great way for me to inject things into my leadership team. I love to assign a podcast to be like, here's a 30-minute podcast, go for a walk and take care of your mind and your body today. And that's a work requirement. I think healthy team members are really important. So I love the Aspire Jenna Grahn podcast, and I love listening to the Factor This podcast. Your podcast is on my long list of people. But
Yeah, there's so many books and so many podcasts.
There's so much out
And
there.
I try to listen to as much as possible, and there's so much great content which is created with the industry. I'm actually excited. We're actually interviewing Eric Ries. He's the author of The Lean Startup. It's actually he's actually coming with a book called Incorruptible. And
cool.
he listens to the Solar Maverick podcast and reached out to me to have him on the podcast, which is coming because I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
But I think it's great, what you're doing with your podcast. It's so important. I know for me, my best learning is hearing stories from people, right? You relate so well when people, talk about challenges and things like that. And then you get inspired to entrepreneurship is hard, but it's when you hear all these great stories, it helps you to okay, I can live another day and do this.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's definitely amazing, the impact that a podcast have. I'm really surprised, how many people have got inspiration from the podcast. And then, it's just, there's so many great podcasts, like the Diary of a CEO.
Yeah, I love that one.
CEO of a solar company was I listened to that podcast and your podcast. I'm wow, that's pretty.
That's really cool.
Most popular podcast out there.
Yeah. Another great one is your LinkedIn feed too. There's some really great people out there that I like to follow intentionally and get inspired about things. So yeah.
Yeah, and you have a pretty big following yourself. I think you have around 17 to 18,000 followers on LinkedIn. It's funny, I asked Abby Hopper this question, how she was able to grow her LinkedIn following. And I'm just curious to hear, because I believe I actually follow certain people on LinkedIn. I learn honestly so much from reading certain feeds from LinkedIn.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for me, it's just consistency, posting, and really creating community. Like, I have a LinkedIn wins folder on my phone and I screenshot things. Originally, a couple years ago, I had a senior executive at Radian tell me that why would I post? Why would I be someone doing an interview? I'm not an expert. And I walked away and I was like, well, that's kind of crazy. Like, I do bring value to the table. Like, I have something to say. And I left RE Plus and I was like, you know what? That happened to RE Plus, and I left RE Plus. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to post every day between now and January 1st and just see what happens. And it's like, it just like, I don't know, it was like the light bulb moment, right? And I have these like incredible messages. And for me, LinkedIn, I spend time intentionally 2 days a week talking about, I have like my mentor Monday posts, and then Saturday I try to do like a working mom post. But, for me, like, I have two kids, I have two daughters, 13 and 7, and my kids rodeo full time, and life is full, right? And I think for me, like, I love like Abby for sure. Like, I definitely, like, she is like my biggest like mentor, idol, biggest encourager in my life, right? And seeing how she was posting, I was like, well, if Abby can do this, like I want to be Abby someday. So I'm gonna try, and I get so many posts from people, messages from men and women, moms and dads, saying like, thank you for talking about that. Like, I don't feel so alone and I don't feel so discouraged. And there's this like human element of what we do in that community. And I have made some really great friends online that have become in real life friends, and I think that's what's so cool about our industry is like we have such great community, and so that's just like a privilege to like add to it, right? And I try every day to, okay, how am I adding value to our community? So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing. That's great to hear. I mean, like it's all about adding value to the community. The solar community is pretty amazing community of people,
Mhm.
very resilient,
Yeah.
very, how can I
Mhm.
say, creative?
Yeah, I mean, how do you survive the solar coaster if you're not any of those things, right? I don't know. Like, we're so unique, I feel like. I think we have such a unique culture. So, and yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I was gonna say, one of the questions that I asked Abby was, I was surprised how she opened up so personally about her life that,
Mhm.
I would be hesitant on a public platform, but she was telling
Yeah.
me those posts are the ones that
Yeah.
people respond more to because we're not really discussing it. And she figured if I'm feeling this,
Yeah.
then like other people are. And like, I know there
Mhm.
was like one post, I forgot which one I was talking to her about that I totally related to, and she was like,
Yeah.
it's surprising, like, and you
Yeah.
mentioned how you're putting yourself out there and
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, there's been lots of really great feedback, and I do try to be pretty vulnerable. I mean, life isn't perfect. Like, life is hard, and I don't know, I'm not a fake it person. Like, I'm just gonna always be like real and open about things. And, I want grace from people too, right? Like, I want to be able to have a bad day and show up to a meeting and be like, gosh, guys, like, I'm really sorry. Like, I had a sick kid last night. Like, I'm running on 2 hours of sleep. Like, I'm going to do my best. But then I want, and my team's going to backstop me. And then I want someone to be able to tell me that so I can backstop them. Right. Like, that's just like the beauty of being in community.
for sure. I think being authentic and people could tell when it's authentic content. There's a lot of people, obviously, it's not that authentic.
Yeah.
So it really resonates, like definitely your content, and it's amazing. I just be
Thank you.
honored. This has been an amazing interview, Kelly. If our audience wanted to learn more about you or Radian Generation, what's the best way they could do that? Or specifically to the May 15th NERC
Yeah.
deadline. So that's coming up.
Definitely our website. We have several blog posts and things like that. And also like follow me on LinkedIn and reach out. And yeah, would love to connect with folks.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have that on the notes of the podcast. And we're going to try to release this as quickly as possible because it's already April 29th and May 15th.
It's
We'll
going
be
so
here
fast.
before
Yes,
we'll be talking about
definitely.
RE Plus Las Vegas very soon.
Yes, we will be.
But thank you, Kelly. This has been
Awesome.
an
Yeah.
amazing interview. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Renew Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@renewEnergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.